I am sad. I have a tear that I can't actually see you, Chip Patterson, but he is joining us on the Adam Gold Show before he leaves for Dallas and the Cotton Bowl for one of the national semifinals. It'll be a live Cover 3 podcast at the national semifinal?
The night before, Thursday night, tomorrow night in Fort Worth at Tannehill's Tavern and Music Hall. We'll also have an Orange Bowl watch party after an hour-and-a-half live show with the Cover 3 guys. We got half-price pizzas, Adam. We got drink specials. I mean, it's going to be the kind of night that you just want to come and post up.
I do.
Hour-and-a-half live show, game watch party, and we'll all be there. I kind of think it's the place to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
If I could just get there. Oh, my gosh. All right, so you guys are going to be there while Penn State and Notre Dame. Are we viewing Penn State versus Notre Dame as the undercard?
Well, without a doubt. And, you know, everything about, Penn State and Notre Dame has been in the college football playoff before, as we know, but certainly this is for Marcus Freeman, just kind of the opportunity, and James Franklin trying to reverse all of the narratives. I mean, right. It is definitely the game where there's a little bit less of we've been here before, a little bit less of, we are the group that was expected to be here from the beginning. And so, yeah, undercard status for sure.
Yeah, because we look at the Ohio State-Texas game as that's the de facto. I can't wait till I hear this. That's the de facto national championship because we assume that whoever wins that game will win the next one. I would say that if Ohio State wins that game, I would expect them to win the next one. I don't feel the same way about Texas. How do you read that?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. My only pushback would be if Texas has beaten Ohio State and Ohio State has played well, not that Ohio State reversed into Michigan game mode and just completely forgot how to throw the ball to their best players. If they play well and Texas jumps up and levels up to go beat them, then yeah, I do think we feel that way. But I don't think that Texas has proven itself to be without flaws. I mean, look no further than the fact they needed double overtime against Arizona State as a double-digit favorite.
Should have lost
that was
the game.
The last time that that was the last time that we saw the Longhorns. And so, I don't think that it's a certainty that it is the de facto national championship, though I would say that if Texas does beat Ohio State, which obviously, as I'm hinting, goes against my expectation in the outcome of this game,
right,
then we're going to feel differently about the Longhorns as they move on to the title game.
Yeah, I'm still not. I mean, look, Quinn Ewers certainly, when he needed to, came up with the goods, but I can't help but think about the play that should have been targeting that wasn't called. Or the fact that you had Texas at 4th and 13, and I don't even know what the defensive call was. I guess it was a blitz, but you didn't have penetration at any point. Like, you rushed 5, and 5 players didn't get within 5 yards of Quinn Ewers on that 4th and 13. I don't understand why defensive coaches don't go, I ain't proud. I'm dropping 11 into coverage. I dare you to gain 13 yards against 11 in coverage. Why don't they do that?
Well, hey, so the way that I understand this, and this is coming from Dillingham and the Arizona State side, is that Quinn checked into the audible that he had to do. In the what do they call it? They call it pass the chalk, right? And whoever has the chalk last, whoever gets to make the last good adjustment is going to be the one who might be able to find the winning play. And Arizona State's coaches say, look, Quinn made a check right to the player he needed to be able to get the conversion. We were going out there. We were being aggressive. We were trying to cause havoc against an offensive line that had dealt with injury issues, not just over the course of the season, but in the game as well. And I think that is actually a little bit of the X factor that if you come back around to how does Texas get this done, it's because Quinn Ewers has been there before. Because he's been he went toe-to-toe with Michael Penix in last year's semifinal. He led a huge comeback in the second half and had a throw to the corner of the end zone that could have advanced them on to the national championship game. He's got, even this season, he played well up in the big house against Michigan, a defense that has NFL players.
Yep.
He does have some experience, and he's come up big in some moments that makes me think that Texas might have a little bit of that X factor that it can call on when you paint the picture of, how do the Longhorns get this done?
Chip Patterson is joining us here en route to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, live watch party, live Cover 3 podcast somewhere in Fort Worth that we can't go to. And that's fair. That is, I think you've worked it out, so we can't crash your party. There's been a lot of criticism about the seeding process. Forget about the selection. And you and I have gone back and forth over whether it's Indiana or SMU. Ultimately, if Alabama doesn't lose 3 times, they're in. If Miami had, beaten Syracuse on the last game, they're in. So, you have to play your way out of these things. I have the same conversation at the NCAA basketball tournament. Man, if we are bitching that you didn't get in the field, that's really your fault because we have to fill the field. But in the seeding process, do you think the committee learned anything that they would do differently?
The committee did not learn anything that it would do differently. I think the stakeholders have a very interesting meeting coming up in Atlanta in advance of the national championship game later this month. They are going to have the conversation about making some adjustments for as soon as 2025 and then continue the conversations about what it looks like for 2026 and beyond. And I don't think that they should just kick the can down the road for both topics. Format, number of teams, all those things are bigger issues. I understand if you want to wait till 2026 for that. But I think that on 2 levels, it is more confusing for fans and less competitive of a bracket when you mix up the seedings with the rankings. The fact that some of the lowest ranked teams in this college football playoff had to go play road games at teams whose ranking would have otherwise put them straight on to the quarterfinals,
right,
made it more of a disadvantage for those lower ranked teams. And so instead of having, a couple competitive games, couple blowouts, then a couple competitive games, couple blowouts, that if you lined up 1 through 4, get to go be in the 1 through 4 spots in the bracket, and then the 5 through 12 won't perfectly line up with 5 through 12 because I do think having the automatic qualifiers is good. But I do think it would create more competition in both the first round and the quarterfinals if our seedings lined up with our rankings. Now, you're going to have bracket luck and you're going to have upsets. That's just sports. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice for the competitiveness. And I saw a lot of fan reaction when they started doing the reveals, that it was so confusing to wrestle with seeds and rankings being different. It made looking at the bracket on a Tuesday night something that they weren't even all that excited about just because they couldn't wrap their mind around it. So if we're going to flash that bracket up on Saturdays and Tuesdays and all through the week, then I think that it'd be nicer if they lined up with the rankings. That would make it a little bit more easier for fans who aren't necessarily college football diehards to understand what's going on.
I'm not Chip Patterson is joining us here in the Adam Gold Show. I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't have the same Final Four we have now. This is not about that. But it does seem
teams 3, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, that we are dealing with the semifinals with teams 3, 4, 5, and 6. If that's what those have been some of the best teams at the end of the year, and if those are the teams that are the 4 playing for it, then we're probably going to have what we view as a fair champion.
But here's I think one of the biggest complaints I have, and I'm going to use two teams as an example: Penn State and Oregon. The path for Penn State to reach the semifinals seemed to me to be significantly more difficult than Oregon's, even though Penn State had to win twice to get there, right? You get an SMU team that was nice, but wasn't going to beat the Nittany Lions in Happy Valley. And then you get, Boise, at a neutral site. And no offense to Boise. Good story. Not going to compete with Penn State, no matter where they played, probably. Maybe if it was in Boise, it would have been something else. But they weren't going to beat Penn State. So Penn State was, hey, I'm not saying you had 2 easy wins, but they were not the biggest challenge in the world. Meanwhile, Oregon had to deal with Ohio State. So to me, that's where the committee kind of messed it up, in that maybe you don't give Oregon the hardest path. Just because Ohio State slept and lost to Michigan didn't mean they weren't one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is if Ohio State wins, one of the unfortunate takeaways is that if you are one of the best teams in America, in one of the top conferences in America, you've got an extra mulligan. And maybe every single time this whole thing has been expanded, you add another mulligan, but that to me takes away from the regular season. The idea that just being, one of those top 5 or 10 teams at the start of the year, you've got a few more times that you can just go and sleepwalk. That takes away from the urgency, that takes away from the pressure, and a lot of the intrigue when we talk about some of the top programs in the sport. It's not going to be the case for everybody, but I do think that, Ohio State just played its 2 best games of the season.
Yeah.
And you could say that's great. They turned it on at the right time, but college football is a sport that has always cherished its regular season. And I think the regular season is losing something, especially looking at, looking at a situation where the Buckeyes team are the number 8 seed, but it is not parity if Ohio State wins its 9th national championship with one of the 2 most talented rosters in America.
Mm-hmm. No, this is the team we thought we were going to see at the beginning of the year. And
correct.
It took a long time. Right.
This is the monster that the season was missing. Everybody was like, "Oh, nobody's good. This is the season of parity." This is what people were expecting. This was the villain. This was supposed to be your old Alabama. This is what Georgia has been at times, and they just weren't it, but they've been it so far in the playoff.
Chip Patterson is joining us here. He's en route to the Cotton Bowl, so we're actually not going to keep him too much longer. I do appreciate you doing this, though. Here's what's interesting about this conversation, and I want to get to a couple of other things real quick. But the interesting thing about this conversation to me is that there are so many people who have been pro-playoff that point to this season and say, oh, my gosh, we had so much more interest in this season, and we did, right? There were a lot more interested parties because there were a lot more teams involved. But you and I are aligned on this part in that, and I pushed back on the result of the Georgia-Alabama game when I think it was Ralph Russo, now writes for The Athletic. I don't think he's with Associated Press anymore, but he used to be the national college football writer for the Associated Press, who was slamming people for saying, well, this game, if you don't think this game mattered, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it obviously, the team that won that game, right, didn't make the playoff. So it certainly, the outcome of games during the regular season really had less importance. They were still fun, which maybe takes us back to a simpler time of college football, Chip Patterson, when we just decided the national champion by a poll at the end.
At the end of the season.
Right.
Just go out there, win as many games as you can. We'll count it up at the end.
Go to the Rose Bowl, have there's a parade. We'll have a Rose Bowl king and queen, although nobody knows who the Rose Bowl king is. To me, it did eat away at the regular season, but the end, there was so much conversation that we forgot about it.
Yeah, the pushback that I've heard as I've sort of floated this out around is, but that's only for a small segment of teams. And one of the purposes of I was actually talking to our friend Joe Giglio about this, and Giglio was saying, the purpose was to be able to involve more of the country, to be able to open the doors of access. And so the regular season may be diminished for Alabama, for Georgia, for Texas, for Ohio State. And in other seasons, maybe Michigan is also getting that same kind of benefit of the doubt. But in giving them, these extra mulligans and diminishing the importance of their regular season, you will also increase the opportunity and the access for a team like Arizona State, for a team like Iowa State, for a team like SMU, these other programs that aren't going to get that along the way. And so, that's the trade-off, is that, yes, the regular season means less to 12, 12 to 15 programs, but that you are bringing in maybe about 25 to 30 more programs and giving them an opportunity that just really was never going to be there in old format.
I mean, I agree with that. And, I talked to coaches from, group of 5 schools, and it created real stakes for them. And I think that's the best element of an expanded playoff. And we agree. We're going to 14 as soon as they can possibly get it. And then probably 16 not that long after that. Would you agree?
I think 14 definitely seems 14 seems more likely. That'll create more on-campus games. So there's all the feedback from the on-campus games was great.
Yeah.
So I would anticipate that they would be all in favor of creating that additional opportunity. The 2 buys still leave something to play for, because if we go to a 16-team bracket with no advantages for anybody, then you're starting to take a real bite out of the conference championship games as well.
You are, but bigger is always better to the people who have money. So I actually think the number won't end until we get to 24, but that's just me. Let me ask you. That's where I believe it. Like, they want to expand the NCAA basketball tournament to 90. We don't need 90.
I mean, listen, what we're going to get, and you can actually appreciate this, is we're just going to get to Stanley Cup playoff style situations where these teams are just falling apart.
Yep.
I mean, we're preparing to go see game number 15 for all these squads right here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is so for Texas, I think it's going to be game number 16.
Yeah, and for Penn State.
And for Penn State as well.
Yep.
I mean, they are hanging on by a thread, man. Like some of these groins and hamstrings. Mm-hmm. I mean, Adam, think about the groins and hamstrings out there.
I am thinking about groins and hamstrings right now, Chip Patterson.
Yeah, the groins and hamstrings are being tested right now. That to me is my ultimate, just like the thing that I always just have a little bit of trouble just jumping on board when we talk about further expansion.
Oh, you and me.
To 16 or 20 or 24. It's the groins and the hamstrings.
I have been there. Yes, my groins. I have one. I'm pretty sure I have one. Anyway, let me just ask you one Bill Belichick thing. But first of all, who do you think's ultimately who we're going to see? Not this Monday, but next Monday night.
Oh, next Monday night, I've got Ohio State over Notre Dame.
Okay. I am rooting for Marcus Freeman. Not that I have anything against James Franklin. I'd love to see Freeman get there. All right, let me just ask you about Bill Belichick real quick. What is the buzz around recruiting portal around Bill Belichick and North Carolina football?
I would say that right now, if you want to say, like, what is the buzz, like, what are some of the conversations that, I'm sort of observing and taking part in, there's a lot more intrigue in the assembly of the staff, maybe, than there is about any one particular portal addition. They've got to go in and they've got to get some quality players to be able to just sort of fill out a depth chart. So a lot of that just feels like registration. You're like, oh, that guy, okay, he seems fine. Then you place him on the depth chart and you go. But, going and building out your own coaching staff and, going to places like IMG to pick up some coaches, obviously the hire of his son, Steve Belichick.
Right.
You add another Lombardi to the general manager's office. I mean, it's interesting, the assembly process as it's going, because what I have not observed is any statement hire that indicates what North Carolina football is going to look like. Because sometimes you are able to make staff hires that can signal to your team, to your fans,
right,
or to college football at large, this is what we're going to be. Offensive coordinator, we're going to have his kind of offense. Defensive coordinator with this reputation, this is what kind of team we're going to be. And while Steve Belichick, we have a body of work, it is not a large enough body of work for us to be able to say that he is that identity. And so that's my big curiosity right now, is because we've got a lot of interesting hires, a lot of outside-the-box type thinking, but nothing yet that tells me what North Carolina football is going to look like when the season starts in the fall.
Chip Patterson, Cover 3 Podcast, live at the Cotton Bowl, not at the Cotton Bowl, but near the Cotton Bowl in Fort Worth, at Chip_Patterson. My friend, I'll talk to you next week. Have a good time. Tell the fellas I said hello.
Sounds good. Y'all be well.